This video is chapter 9-1. Our concept is I can identify key features of quadratic functions from a graph. I'm going to be writing out the vocab over here on the side and also labeling these graphs. So make sure that you have a sketch of these graphs so that you can label them as well. So the first vocabulary word is parabola. The word parabola refers to this shape on the graph. One way we can describe it is a U-shaped curve. Parabolas can look two ways. They can either be facing upwards like this one, or we could see them point downwards. Both of these are considered parabolas. They're just pointing in different directions. So a parabola is a U-shaped curve. Now our first key features. Our first key feature is the axis of symmetry. The axis of symmetry is a line that crosses through our graph and splits it into two equal halves. Splits our U into two equal halves. It goes right down the middle. So if we look at this example right here, our axis of symmetry would be right here. I'm going to draw it in pink. This line right here splits my parabola in half perfectly. So this is our axis of symmetry right here. Our axis of symmetry can always be written with an equation. The equation, if it is a vertical line, will be written as x equals whatever number it crosses through on the x-axis. So in this case, this x value is 0. So our axis of symmetry equation is x equals 0. This is an equation that describes the pink line that we drew right here on the graph. Next, after the axis of symmetry, we have our vertex. Now in the context of parabolas, the vertex is always either the lowest point of our curve or the highest point. The vertex is always going to run through the axis of symmetry. So the vertex is either the highest or lowest point of the U curve. And for this example right here, our vertex is located right here. The axis of symmetry is always going to run through the vertex. And there's two ways that we can describe our vertex. The first is a maximum or a minimum. A maximum would mean that the vertex is the highest point of the graph. And a minimum means that our vertex is the lowest point of the graph. So looking at this example, our vertex is at the lowest point. So this would be a minimum because it's at the bottom of our U-shaped curve. Now the next points, these should be familiar, are the intercepts. We first have the y-intercept, which we have discussed before. Y-intercept is where our graph crosses the y-axis. So in this example, our y-axis is right here. It just happens to be that for this example, the y-intercept is actually at the same location as some of our other key features. So it crosses the y-axis right here. The other intercepts that we need to include are the x-intercepts. Sometimes there may be more than one, x-intercept, sometimes there might be no x-intercepts. So an x-intercept is where the graph crosses the x-axis. And for this graph that we've been looking at, it crosses our x-axis twice. There is an x-intercept right here and right here. This is our x-axis, and we can see the u goes through these 2 points right here. So this is our first x-intercept, and this is our other x-intercept. So this graph has 2 of them. Now, there's another word that you might see that also refers to the x-intercept. You'll see it used interchangeably, and that is the roots. So sometimes we call these the x's or the x-intercepts. Another word that is used sometimes is the roots, and this just literally means the same thing. They just call it different words. So you might also see it referred to as the root. Now, these key features can all be identified with this second graph right here. So I'm going to show you where they are in this graph. So let's start with the axis of symmetry. Axis of symmetry is going to split the parabola right in half. So this is going to be our axis of symmetry right here. Next, we have our vertex. Remember, the vertex is the highest or the lowest point of the graph. In this example, our vertex is right here. And unlike the other one where our vertex was a minimum, this vertex is actually a maximum because this point is actually the highest of the graph. So this is a maximum point. Next is our y-intercepts. Our y-intercept is right here where it crosses the y-axis. So this is our y-intercept. And the y-intercept is at -4. Finally, we have the x-intercept or the roots. In this example, our graph only touches the x-axis at one spot. And so we have an x-intercept right here because it's crossing the x-axis. So those are all of our key features. The next thing that you are going to do is try to identify them yourself from a graph. Here I have an example of a graph. I have typed in my equation up at the top, and it has graphed the parabola for me. You can zoom in if you need to see the points more clearly, and here we should be able to identify all of the key features. Go ahead and take a second to see if you can find the axis of symmetry, vertex, max or minimum, y-intercept, and x-intercepts on your own. And then come back to the video to make sure that you have all the key features identified. Okay, so the first is our axis of symmetry. Now our axis of symmetry is going to run straight between our parabola. So axis of symmetry is going to be going through this vertex right here. The vertex, you can actually hover over the graph, and it tells you that it's at 0.5, -4.5. Our vertex in this example is a minimum because this is the lowest point of the graph. Our y-intercept is right here at -4, and we have 2 x-intercepts here at -1 and also at +2. Now you are going to practice identifying these on your own using Desmos. Type in the equation and then identify each of the points.